Welcome to the Busy Pastor Podcast. If you're interested in leadership and ministry coaching, go to busypastor.org/coaching. Join the Busy Pastor community today by going to busypastor.org and filling out the form. You'll receive more free resources, starting with our Fab 5 resource, helping you determine the 5 things that only you can do. My name is Greg Gibson. I'm joined by my co-host, Trent Stewart, the lead pastor at Foothills Church. And today we are talking about leading staff. Episode 24 of the Busy Pastor Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Welcome to everyone who's joining us for the first time. And Trent, we're talking today about leading staff. So let's get right into the content. And
let's do it.
Yeah, for the first question, I want to take us all the way back to when you first planted Foothills Church and begin our conversation around the first staff positions that you hired when you planted FC, and why you hired those positions.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that we hired was a worship pastor, and so I think someone that obviously when you're a church plant, somebody that can do multiple things. So worship pastor that also had some production skills and that kind of stuff was, I think, really important at that point. And then shortly after that was a student pastor / missions, which I think was, for me, intentional. You know, a lot of people I've heard, and I was encouraged to get like a kids pastor to, start with, but I was coming out of student ministry, so I really just had a heart for students, and specifically kind of in our context here, there weren't any churches that had dynamic student ministries that were really engaging the high school campuses and middle school campuses around this area. And so I really felt like, man, if we could start then and start to build that student ministry culture. I had my wife and some other strong volunteers that really led the charge in kids ministry at that time. And so, my wife was able to lean into that, and she was free, so didn't have to pay her. So that was, I think for us, it just worked really well. And I would encourage guys to really think through how they could start a student ministry that would really engage the campuses, because when you do student ministry well, the benefits are just so huge. I mean, you're talking about kids that, come to faith and families that get excited. And we have a lot of families that would start coming to our church because their son or their daughter, received Christ. And so now you're pulling in families in that way. And so that's what I did. I would encourage guys to really think through that. And I think that was just a huge win for us.
Yeah. And so for perspective, Foothills Church is how old? Our anniversary recently, what number we celebrate?
12. So we're 12 years old.
So at the beginning, I think that is a pretty interesting perspective, that right from the beginning, you hired a worship pastor. That was an important first hire, but then you hired a student pastor, and from what I have seen and have been a part of and have seen kind of in the church planting world, that is backwards, right? You're hiring a kids person first. Yeah. But like you were mentioning a moment ago, I think the uniqueness of that was, A, you knew our context, B, you knew the need of our context. And I think I was a part of FC in those early days. In fact, I was that guy that you hired. And as I look back on it, it felt like Foothills was more established than it should have been in some senses. Because if you have a kids person, you're drawing young families, you kind of have like early 20s, mid 20s people running around. Yeah. But we were drawing that, plus we were drawing more established families that had teenagers during that stage.
Right. And I think at that point in my life, I had little kids. Yeah. And so typically, in churches, whoever the lead pastor is, that's really where that draw, from the community is. Whoever you are, you're going to draw that life stage.
Right.
So we were drawing that life stage anyway, and so that was as far as young kids.
Right.
And so that on top of, having volunteers that could build a kids ministry, it's not rocket science. Mm-hmm. So you build that out, you're going to draw, that group. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the student crowd, but here's the other thing I would say is that you want to hire a student pastor who's a leader, mm-hmm. And who is just talented, somebody that has a lot of talent, somebody that has, really a self-motivation, somebody that, really is a charge the hill kind of person, because in that stage of your church, you're starting all kinds of stuff. And mm-hmm. so you need initiators, you need gatherers around you, because you're going to be, barely keeping your head above water as a church planner in the beginning stages. And so you don't want somebody that's just constantly draining you, and you're having to give that person so much attention that, you're not leading in the ways that you need to. And so you're always going to be, managing, and we'll talk about other staff issues today, but you really want the initiators and the gatherers.
Yeah. That founder type who in many ways you can still develop and you're still pouring into mentoring, but you're able to see this person charge the hill.
I would rather
alongside of you.
I would rather hold a guy back and steer him a little bit than have to constantly push a guy to get out there and work and get stuff done. And so that's the tension that I chose to deal with. You're always going to be wrestling with one of those tensions, the guy that's just not working hard enough or doesn't know what he's doing, and you're constantly pushing, versus the guy that is going 100 miles an hour and you're constantly trying to steer. But
yes,
pick your poison.
Yeah, I think so. And so now 12 years in, we've seen Foothills Church go through different iterations of growth, and you've hired, different staff members now. I think there's, 30 plus, staff members here at FC. But so one more question on that. Would you go back and do it differently? I mean, would you, knowing what you know now, being over a decade in this context with FC, would you do it differently?
I would do a lot differently. But I guess I would encourage guys not to live in the past. And so I try not to live in the past and try to rework. But one thing that I would go back and do differently, and it's not because I didn't hire a good person or I didn't have a good team at that time. I had a great team. I had great people. And in one sense, I wouldn't change the staff that I hired. I wouldn't go back and change that. But if I were going to go plant a new place today, then I would go with a part-time worship pastor. And I would start that way and get somebody local and someone that, I could go part-time with financially, and then that would free me up to hire one, maybe two other guys, mm-hmm. Have a student guy and somebody that focused on local missions or focused on small groups. Mm-hmm. So to have two pastors that were gatherers and initiators, would have been, I think, a difference in the life of our church.
Yeah, so there's a lot of younger guys listening to, this episode and who are listeners of the Busy Pastor podcast. And these are guys who are planting churches right now. These are guys who are leading smaller churches. And so, I think that is good advice, going back and maybe changing some things. But what would you recommend to these young guys who are listening in this season of ministry, and what should they be looking for kind of as they're thinking about this?
I think one of the biggest prayers for me is just that God would bring and draw the best leaders and the leaders that have a heart to make disciples. And so whoever that is in your vein, whoever God brings into, your sphere of influence, then try to get them on your team, and then whatever they're good at, then let them run in that lane. And so you're just constantly trying to get the best talent and heart for ministry and potential around you. Right. And so I wouldn't be so dialed into, I gotta have this niche guy, or I gotta have this type of person that is gonna do, small groups or whatever, the best small group guy. You don't want specialized people at that stage, when you're at a church under 150. You want guys who are kind of multi-use, are just growing in leadership and have a heart to make disciples, and they can do multiple things. And you're going to have to, as the lead guy, you're going to have to develop and coach and constantly, have conversations about how we can do things better. So whoever God is bringing into that lane, you're casting out that net and just bringing the best talent that you possibly can, and then work with their skill set to give them a position is what, really what I've done over the last 12 years anyway.
Yeah. One thing I would add to that, in planting Veritas in DC, we were a couple hundred people and a small staff, and I definitely felt that as well. And kind of the encouragement that I would give alongside of what you just said is those 4 C's in kind of hiring staff. I can't remember who that's attributed to.
I don't either.
But it's competency, chemistry, culture, and character.
Yeah.
And guys, you're going to hire guys who are competent for sure. But I think in the early days, and you're going to hire guys hopefully with high character. So those 2 things, check and check.
Check.
But I think it's so important in those early days to hire guys who have chemistry with you.
Yeah.
And who are bought into the culture that you're beginning to create, with your church. Because if they're not, it's going to be glaring.
Yeah.
More so than when you have a staff of 30, 40, 50, et cetera, where, okay, there's going to be different teams that people are a part of. You need strengths and weaknesses. You need, the different gift sets that guys bring.
Yeah.
But when you're just starting out, those, I would just kind of throw that as icing on the cake there. So FC, last 12 years, you were in student ministry before that, leading staff in a larger church, in your role as well, Trent. Let's talk lessons. All right. So just quickly, what are some lessons that you've learned in leading staff over the last 20 years?
Well, I think I was surprised, once we started growing and we started adding more people to the team, I was surprised at how much time staff took out of my week. And I think, if somebody's listening who's not in ministry or not a pastor, like that's like one of the main things that, like right now, I do all week. And so that was surprising because, I guess in the back of your mind, kind of going into ministry, and when I was pastoring a small church before, I didn't have any staff. I had like a secretary and a part-time, worship guy, but I just didn't realize how much energy and time and focus it was going to take. And so I would just, one of the lessons I've learned is that you're just always dealing with something. There's always an issue. I mean, literally, there's always an issue. I don't care if your staff is, 3 people or 30 or definitely over that, you're always going to have issues. There's just always something going. And if you're growing, then you're always trying to hire somebody, you're trying to reorganize to better suit the needs of the church, or you're in the process of letting somebody go. And so I think that's just one of the things where at this point, I get it. It's like every week there's something. And so we're always dealing with some kind of issue. And I guess the encouragement for guys listening is, man, don't be afraid of that. That's just ministry.
Yeah.
Don't let that discourage you, and don't let that feel like, man, I have the worst staff because we're always dealing with something. I wish I just had mature guys. Like, no, that's just part of life. It's part of ministry. You're always going to have issues. You're constantly training. You're constantly equipping, and here's the other big one is you're always realigning. And so you're never in a phase to where you can sit back and say, hey, I think everybody's on board and we're all pushing in the right direction. That never, to me, maybe one day out of the year that is true. Right. Outside of that, we're always course correcting and always trying to bring folks back into realignment of the direction that we're trying to go. And so I think that's just one of the bigger lessons. And then just another lesson is just always hire leaders and gatherers you're going to get to a point to where, you know, we're hiring specialized people now in certain areas. And so that's needed at some point. But early on, you know, when your staff is 2, 3, 4 people, you really want to hire, you know, guys, ladies that are gatherers, leaders, and not just somebody that is a yes man. That's one of the things that I would encourage too is, you know, I never wanted to hire a yes man, somebody that just says, whatever you want, Trent, or yeah, that's great, let's move, you know, wherever. You want guys that are going to like have the freedom to say, hey, that sounds good, but have you thought about this? And, you know, what about this? And because you want people around you to bring that skill set, those questions, and their train of thought so that you can make the best decision. And so as a leader, it's not just, I want to make all the decisions. No, I don't want to make the best decision. And so you want to bring guys around the table, ladies around the table that, you know, can help you get to that decision. And so you want to have what we've always called robust dialogue. You know, we want to come into the room. We want to have the freedom to be able to ask the question, to be able to challenge the thought. And then when we get up and we walk out that door, everybody knows that we're all on the same page, and we're not going to backbite or diminish anybody like, well, this is what I wanted, but he decided to do that. Like, no, you want to build a culture where we're going to have the discussions around the table in the room as a team. And then when we get up and we leave, we're all on the same team and we're all speaking highly of each other and 100% bought into whatever the decision is.
Yeah, robust dialogue in so many ways is built on trust. And building teams is an art in itself, but leading teams is a whole nother art, you know, a whole nother angle to leadership. And, you know, I think I've seen that here at Foothills Church where, you know, when we are practicing that value, that value of dialogue or robust dialogue, it's for the benefit of the mission, right? It's for the benefit of the church. It's for the benefit of making the best decision, like you said, in community. And I think that's so important as you're thinking about, you know, leading the staff or leading the team that you have, and how you're getting guys around the table to speak into the decision making and letting guys run in their lane. I love that you said you want to hire leaders and not followers.
Well, that's huge, especially in a younger church. Always, but I think that was one of the good things that we did here is that, like, we gave and empowered leaders to lead. And so I'm not going to come look over your shoulder every day. You know, there's a level of trust that you're going to get it done. And so in the system of our meetings, you know, there's quarterly meetings, there's, you know, the weekly meetings, so that we have that one-on-one time so I can ask questions. How's it going in this area? How's it going in this area? And so I've got my pulse on that. But at the same time, you know, I'm entrusting guys to lead this well. And I think we have to be able to do that. And if you're leading somebody who you're constantly like babysitting, then they're probably just not ready to lead in that area. And I think the other lesson, and we can move on to the next question. The other is you've got to be willing to make the hard decision with staff. You've got to make the hard decision that says this guy isn't in his, you know, in the right area of ministry, or he's not getting it done here. And you've got to be able to either move him or her, or let them go, or just help them in their journey. The best thing I can do for a guy is be honest with him. And if I can be honest with him about what he's doing well and what he's not doing well, and if he's not a good fit for here, then the best thing I can do for him and his family is tell him that, so he can get where he will fit in and he will be successful and be fulfilling. And so I think we always look at that hard conversation as I don't want to be mean, I want to be nice, but really, you're not being nice to that person if you're not being honest to them.
Yeah, I've heard a guy once call it misplaced compassion, right? So it's placing compassion on the wrong thing. You're valuing the lack of tension or the lack of conflict, which in a way begins to hurt your staff and then hurt your church.
Oh, it hurts your church for sure.
And then hurt your community because you're not reaching the people that you should be reaching. And I mean, it's just a trickle effect. And so that's such a good point. So let's talk about the stages of growth that a team experiences for a second. And you and I both have been influenced by the book Sticky Teams by Larry Osborne. And so let's talk through that. And I think this is an important conversation for guys listening. And so let's talk through those stages of growth for a second.
Yeah, I love how he kind of gives this, because we're sports guys, and so stages of your church based on different sports. And so he says stage one of a church he calls a track star. And so this is where, you've got one guy, one pastor, he kind of does everything by himself. These are churches maybe from 150, or less. And so this is kind of like the solo guy, right? And so I would suggest that if you're planning a church or if you're at a small church, that you recognize if you're kind of being the track star, because you don't want to be this guy.
Right.
You don't want to try to do this all on your own. Even if you're at a church less than 100, you want to empower, some people, even if you're not paying them, lay leaders, to take responsibility for small groups or for students or for whatever, so that you have a team. Never just lead your church alone. That's very dangerous and I think unbiblical. And so, but there are stages where, okay, man, I am the only guy here. I need to get, I need to make some adjustments, but that's the first stage. And the second stage, he talks about being what he calls golfing buddies. And so this is where you're highly relational. There's only 2 or 3 of you, maybe churches over 150 to, maybe 300, 400, 500 people. So they're able to make quick decisions. And you remember in the early days when we were working here, together, if we wanted to, change a program, didn't matter how big the program was or how often we had done it from year to year. If we wanted to make a change, one meeting, boom, done, change, move on, hallway conversations and hallway meetings could happen and we could adjust quickly. And so that's fun. When you're highly relational, it's a small team, you're making decisions quick, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun because, whether you're eating lunch together or you're doing ministry together, it's just, a lot of time together to, just to do life and ministry together. So that stage is pretty fun. And so that's why a lot of churches kind of get stuck in that stage, is because honestly, pastors love that camaraderie and that relational time and that ability to make decisions quickly, and they don't have to trust any more people and they don't have to bring any more people on. And so it's kind of an easy way just to lead. And so that's why I think a lot of churches don't get out of that, 300-400 number. But then you move into what he calls the basketball team. And so obviously resonates with me as a basketball player, but this is, you're still working together. You still know everybody on the team, but you shifted a little bit because now there are more specialized people on the team. And so you definitely have to work together, but there's more trust on the team because you have to share the ball a little bit more. And, you've got your shooters, you've got, the guard play maybe out, you guys are shooting threes. This is the big man. He kind of stays inside. This is the point guard. He's kind of handling the ball. And so you do have more of a specialized, but still you're kind of doing multiple things. You got to play offense and you got to play defense, and everybody's got to box out and rebound, but there's still very high relationships here, but the team is just, bigger. There are many role players. So yeah, I think when you hit that 350, 400, hopefully you're if you get over that, you're making that shift in that sense. But then the final stage is like the football team. And so this is like the drastic change where churches, that are over that 600, reaching that 1,000 or above have kind of taken root. And so now you have specialized guys. You have an offensive coordinator, you have a defensive coordinator, and they practice together. They don't always know each other's plays. They don't always know what's happening, but they're on the same team. You've got the wide receiver coach, then you got the punter over there punting, and we never know what he's doing at practice. But, that's just kind of how it goes. And so as a pastor, I don't know even everything that everybody's doing at this point as far as, day to day. And there are things happening at the church that I don't know about, there's meetings here and stuff, and that's just part of it. I can't know everything at this point as the lead guy, but I think this football level even could break down into, you've got your Division 1A, your SEC Big Ten schools, where these are the multi, churches that have just mega churches. And then you kind of have that next tier down, Division 1, kind of churches as well, maybe a little bit, smaller, between 1,000, 2,000 or a little over. And so I think that breakdown just kind of helps know how I'm supposed to lead the team, or how I can best effectively lead the team, and really continue to release things to those coaches / pastors.
Yeah, and so thanks for walking through that. And again, that's the book Sticky Teams by Larry Osborne. Another article that I'm going to put in our show notes, if you just go to busypastor.org and click on the show, is by Tim Keller, and it's just a stages of church growth where he kind of parallels this stuff: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and he breaks it down a little bit more into kind of the relational and administrative struggles that you may have at different stages, what church members look for at each stage. So go to the show notes, read that. I think that's going to be helpful as well.
I would say one other good resource on this is Les McEwen's book called Predictable Success, because this is a book that is written for businesses, but in so many ways, when you start a small business, that's really kind of has some parallels to the church world. And so he talks about different stages of business, and there are different stages of a church as well that I think tie in.
Yeah. And so again, all of that will be put in the show notes for you to go and click the links and take you to those, what we think are great resources. And so thank you so much for listening to episode 24. We'll be back next week, episode 25, continuing our discussion on leading staff. Thank you for listening to the Busy Pastor podcast. As we close today's episode, we want to invite you to do a few things. Join the Busy Pastor community today by going to busypastor.org and filling out the form. You'll receive more free resources, starting with our Fab 5 resource, helping you determine the 5 things only you can do. Also, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Busy Pastor. And if you like today's episode, subscribe to the Busy Pastor and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we are continuing our conversation on being busy leading our staff. The Busy Pastor podcast is produced by Andrew Lindstrom, video production Jake Tipton, audio engineer Brian Papik, music by Brandon Sharp, and graphics by Zach Shaddix. See you next week. Until then, let's be busy with the right things. Thank you so much for tuning into our YouTube page. Hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and don't forget to comment below.
New episodes come out every Thursday. For more content and to join the Busy Pastor community, visit busypastor.org.